Shalom, everybody. We're picking back up on the study of the book of Enoch through the book of Enoch, starting in chapter 22. First Enoch, chapter 22. We dropped off last week on at the end of chapter 21. Now, I think I mentioned this last week. It certainly comes into play this week. There are three Hebrew words that get translated hell in the King James Version, and most English Bibles today, in fact. Actually, one of them doesn't actually occur in that context in the KJV, but it does. It is a Hebrew word. We'll talk about it in a minute. And then three corresponding Greek words in the Greek version of the New Testament. And of course, corresponding Aramaic words in the Aramaic version of the New Testament. So these three Hebrew words, the first word is Sheol. And we'll be dealing with Sheol in First Enoch chapter 22. It's all about Sheol. And there's a lot of controversy about the word Sheol because there are those who argue that the word Sheol should simply be translated the pit or the grave. And then there are those that argue that Sheol is actually a place. And First Enoch settles the debate quite firmly in its description of Sheol in chapter 22, which we'll get to shortly. Then Sheol is a place of where souls await the resurrection. It's a pre-resurrection afterlife. And Sheol is actually divided up into sections, and we'll get into that in First Enoch. Some of those sections we would identify with Paradis or Paradise, Gan Eden, because, and that's fitting because Ezekiel tells us that the Garden of Eden was cast into Sheol. And then some of them are compartments are not so nice places that are actually better fitting for the idea of what we might think of as hell. But that's a pre-resurrection state. And then there is a post-resurrection location called the Lake of Fire. It's also known as Gehenna in Hebrew. It's called the Lake of Fire in some places. And we'll talk about Gehenna when we get to it, because it'll also come into play today. And the last, by the way, the Hebrew word Sheol corresponds to the Greek word Hades in the Greek New Testament. And the Hebrew word Gehenna corresponds with the Greek word Gehenna, which we'll talk about that word when we get to it. And then Tahti is the last Hebrew word. Tahti means the lowest place, and it corresponds to the Greek word Tartarus. Tahti is used in where Tahti appears in the Septuagint, at least on occasion. In the Masoretic text. It is at least at times, if not always, translated Tartarus in the Septuagint. And Tartarus appears one time in the Greek New Testament, and it is the place where the Nephilim, the condemned Nephilim, await the judgment. It may also be their used to describe their final resting place, their final place of judgment, but it's definitely used to describe the place where they await the judgment. Okay, which we talked about in chapter 21 last week. Tahti. This week we want to talk about the place known as Sheol, the place of the pre-resurrection afterlife. So the Book of Enoch weighs in on and settles the issue of so-called soul sleep and that the soul sleep doctrine, and we could do a whole video on that and the various passages that are used to support or deny that. But that's really beyond the scope of today's study. Today's study, we're just going to see what Enoch says about the issue and correlate it somewhat with Scripture. So chapter 22, verse 1, and thence I went to another place, and he showed me towards the west a large and high mountain of hard rock. And there was in it 4 hollow places. So there's 4 compartments, 4 hollow places, deep and wide and very smooth. How smooth are the hollow places, and deep and dark to look at. Then Raphael answered one of the set apart angels who was with me and said to me, these hollow places have been created for this very purpose, that the spirits of the souls of the dead should assemble therein. Yea, that all the souls of the children of men should assemble here. Verse 4, and lo, these are the pits for their imprisonment. They have been fashioned in this very way till the day of their judgment, until the time of the end of the great judgment, until the time of the end of the great judgment where it is to be made against them. So, at the resurrection, of course, then they're brought before the throne of judgment and they're judged. Prior to that time, this is where they wait. There I saw the spirit of a dead man making suit, and his voice went forth to heaven, crying increasingly and making suit. This is like the voice of Abel, the blood of Abel making suit against Cain in Genesis chapter 4. It's a motif we see a lot. We see it a lot in the Book of Enoch. We see it in the Talmud. There's an account of a priest that was killed and his blood cried out. So this is a very common concept, and it is one that indicates consciousness in the pre-resurrection afterlife. The soul in this pre-resurrection afterlife state is aware and is communicating, contrary to certain doctrines that are out there. So, verse 6, and I asked Raphael, the watcher, and set apart one who was with me, and I said to him, this spirit which makes suit, whose is it, whose voice goes forth and makes suit to heaven? And he answered me, saying, this is the spirit which went forth from Abel, whom his brother Cain slew, and he makes his suit against him till his seed is destroyed and from the face of the earth, and his seed is annihilated from among the seed of men. And then I asked regarding it, regarding all the hollow places, why is one separated from the other? So let's get to that in a minute. But so this is Cain crying out. This is, in fact, the blood of Abel, crying out. And we see this several times in the Book of Enoch. In fact, I think I may have some references for that here. Let me check real quick. Yeah, that's Genesis 4:10, and also Matthew. There's interesting cross references for that you may want to look up in your studies in Matthew 23:35, which is referencing to this priest Zechariah, whose blood cried out from the altar, and Revelation chapter 6 verses 9 through 10, which we'll get to in a minute, which is the souls crying out from the altar. It comes up again in 1st Enoch 4:47, verses 1 and 2. And there's a parallel in the Mishnah in Sanhedrin 4:5. Um, let me see here. Let's talk about this instance in Matthew 23 while we're there. And see if I can find this real quick here. Okay, first of all, let's talk about this parallel in Mishnah Sanhedrin 4:5, which says, "And it is said, the bloods of your brother cry," Genesis 4:10, which is what we're talking about here. It does not say the blood of your brother, but the bloods of your brother, his blood and the blood of all those who were destined to be born from him. Another matter, the bloods of your brother, for his blood was splattered on trees and stones. Whoever destroys a single Israelite and is deemed by Scripture as if he had destroyed is deemed by Scripture as if he destroyed the whole world. And whoever saves a single Israelite soul by Scripture is as if he saved the whole world, which is why the word blood is in the plural there, is what it's saying. So this is in Matthew 23:35. It says, "Upon you may come all the righteous blood which has been shed upon the earth, from Havel the righteous to Zechariah ben Berechiah, whom you slew between the temple and the altar." This is actually, according to the Gospel according to the Hebrews, it was actually Zechariah ben Yehodiah, which we see in 2 Chronicles 24, chapter 24, verses 20 through 21. And this is comparing two things: the beginning of the Tanakh to the end of the Tanakh, because the Tanakh begins in Genesis and it ends in 2 Chronicles, at least in the Jewish ordering of the books. Then if we go to the Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin 96b, and I'm going to read that version of the story, but there's a longer version of it in the Jerusalem Talmud, Ta'anit 69. But I'm going to read you the short version. Nebuzaradan, after that he saw the blood of Zechariah seething. "What is this?" cried he. It is the blood of sacrifices." So the people answered him. They said, "It's the blood of sacrifices, which has been spilled." They answered. "Then," said he, "bring some animal blood to me, and I will compare them to see whether they are alike." So he slaughtered animals and compared them, but they were dissimilar. "Disclose the secret to me, or if not, I will tear your flesh with iron combs," he threatened. They replied, "This is the blood of a priest and a prophet who foretold the destruction of Jerusalem to the Israelites. We killed him." I'm going to stop there. The story goes on, but the point is that there was blood crying out, making suit to Elohim in this story, this account. So these are two stories, the priest Zechariah and Cain, in which there's blood crying out. Okay, so let's resume our account here in First Enoch. Chapter 22, going on to verse 8. Then I asked regarding it and regarding all the hollow places. Remember, there were 4 hollow places, 4 compartments. "Why is one separated from the other?" And he answered me and said to me, "These 3 have been made that the spirits of the dead might be separated, and such a division has been made for the spirits of the righteous, in which there is the bright spring of water. And such has been made for the sinners when they die, and are buried in the earth, and the judgment has not been executed on them in their lifetime. Here their spirits shall be set apart in this great plain till the great day of judgment and punishment and torment of those who curse forever, and retribution for their spirits. There he shall bind them forever. And the third was divided for the spirits who petition with information concerning their destruction when they were killed in the day of the sinners. Such has been made for the spirits of men who were not righteous, but sinners who were complete in transgression. And of the transgressors they shall be companions, but their spirits shall not be slain in the day of judgment, nor shall they be afflicted from thence. Then I blessed Yahweh my glory and said, Blessed be my master, Yahweh of righteousness, who rules forever. Okay, there's a lot to learn here, but let's look at our handout about Sheol first of all. What is Sheol? And we already discussed a little bit about the controversy on its translation. But I have a little quote here from the Encyclopedia Judaica article on the netherworld, and it says, it points out several names are given to the abode of the dead, the most common being Sheol, always feminine and without the definite article, a sign of proper nouns. The term does not occur in other Semitic languages except as a loan word from Hebrew. Sheol and its etymology is obscure. So the point that's being made here is that the word Sheol, which appears multiple times in the Tanakh, always appears in the feminine form, and it never takes the definite article. And that with the the great number of times that this word appears in the Tanakh, for it to never take a definite article, and for it to always appear in the feminine form, is a sure sign that it is a proper noun, that is the name of the place, and not simply a word meaning the grave or the pit. In the Tanakh, the word Sheol is often contrasted with heaven, like Job 11:8, Psalm 139, and Amos 9:2. So there's apparently a contrast there between the two. According to the Tanakh, the wicked and godless nations go to Sheol, Psalm 9:17. According to Psalms 86:13, the soul goes to Sheol. And according to Proverbs 15:24, Sheol can be avoided. And in Proverbs 23:14, a soul is delivered from Sheol. In Isaiah 57:9, a soul is lowered to Sheol. So all these are clues that Sheol is not just a word meaning the grave, but a place for souls. So the Sheol would seem to be a proper name of a place, and contrasted with heaven and being a destination for souls in some kind of afterlife. The first century Jewish historian Flavius Josephus describes the belief of the Pharisees concerning this pre-resurrection afterlife in a way that corresponds with what we read here in the book of Enoch. It's in his Antiquities of the Jews, book 18, chapter 1, part 3. It says, they hold the belief that an immortal strength belongs to souls, and that there are beneath the earth punishments and rewards for those who in life devoted themselves to virtue or vileness, and that eternal imprisonment is appointed for the latter, but the possibility of returning to life for the former. I mentioned that the Tanakh says the Garden of Eden, the Gan Eden, was cast into Sheol in the book of Ezekiel, and that's found in Ezekiel chapter 31, verses 16 through 18. So we can imagine that Ganidon paradise is actually a compartment within Sheol, and that's going to fit with what we see here in First Enoch chapter 22. It also is fitting with what Yeshua says in Luke chapter 16, verses 19 30 through 31. Now there was one rich man, and he wore linen and purple, and every day he was luxuriously merry. And there was one poor man whose name was Eleazar, and he lay at the gate of that rich man, stricken with sores. And he desired that his belly be filled with crumbs that fell from the table of that rich man. But even the dogs came and licked his sores. Now time passed, that poor man died, and the angels carried him to the bosom of Abraham, and also that rich man died, and he was buried. And while tormented in Sheol, he lifted up his eyes from afar and saw Abraham and Eleazar in his bosom. These are separate compartments of Sheol, if you will. And he cried with a great voice and said, My father Avraham, have mercy on me, and send Eleazar to dip the tip of his finger in water, and to moisten my tongue for me, for behold, I am tormented in this flame. Avraham said to him, My son, remember that you received your good during your life, and Eleazar his bad. And now, behold, he is resting here, and you are tormented. With all these things, a great gulf is placed between us and you, so that those who want to pass over from here to you are not able, nor from there to pass over to us. This is all fitting with what we read in 1 Enoch 22. Then he said to me, I beg to you, my father, that you send him to the house of my father, for I have 5 brothers. Let him go and testify to him. Well, the rest of this isn't really relevant to our account in 1 Enoch 22. Okay, so some have tried to make that a parable, but it's not presented by Yeshua as a parable. It's presented by Yeshua as a matter of fact. He doesn't say this is like that or whatever. He says very matter-of-factly, there was one rich man. And in verse 20, there was one poor man, as if he has some supernatural knowledge, of course, but some knowledge that these are actual facts. He's not just presenting some kind of a parable. Another reason we know it's not a parable is if the parable represents something. If this is representing something that's not true, then it would be a terrible parable with no value whatsoever. It would be, comparing things that don't compare. All right. So, souls are the last of this handout. Souls are conscious and aware in Sheol, and we just saw that in the passages that we were looking at in Luke and in Revelation 6, 9 through 11, where souls under the altar, which is what's being talked about here, are crying out and making suit. Just like the blood of Cain in Genesis 4:10 and in 1 Enoch 22. So 1 Enoch 22 pretty much settles the question of whether souls are conscious in the afterlife, awaiting the resurrection, or whether they're unconscious and even non-existent, waiting for the resurrection. Our next handout is 4 compartments of Sheol, and it's very interesting that the 4 compartments that are described in the book of Enoch here says in verse 2 that there are 4 compartments, but in verse 9 that there are 3 separations, because if you have 4 compartments, then you have 3 separations between them. These correspond to the 4 types of men according to the Talmud. In the Babylonian Talmud, Berachot 9a, it talks about the righteous man who prospers, a righteous man who suffers, a wicked man who prospers, and a wicked man who suffers. The righteous man who prospers is described in 1 Enoch 22:9. And he answered and said unto me, These three have been made, that the spirits of the dead might be separated, and such a division has been made. There's three separations, there's four compartments. And such divisions have been made for the spirits of the righteous, in which there is a bright spring of water. That's for the righteous man who prospers. Then there's the wicked man who prospers, and that corresponds to verses 10 and 11. And such has been made for sinners when they die and are buried in the earth, and judgment has not been executed on them in their lifetime. They prospered in their lifetime. Here their spirits shall be set apart in this great pain till the great day of judgment and punishment and torment for those who cursed forever, and retribution for the spirits. There he shall bind them forever. Then verse 12 deals with the righteous man who suffers. The third was divided for the spirits petitioned and information concerning their destruction when they were killed in the day of the sinners. These are like Abel. They were righteous men, but they suffered. They suffered torment. They died wrongly at the hands of someone, and perhaps they were tortured. Perhaps they simply suffered in life. And then the wicked men who suffer is in verse 13. Such has been made for the spirits of men who were not righteous, but sinners who were complete in transgression, and of the transgressors they shall be companions, but their spirits shall not be slain in the day of judgment, nor shall they be afflicted from thence, because they suffered for their transgression while they were still alive. Okay, so it's very interesting that there is an exact correspondence here in the four compartments of Sheol as outlined in 1 Enoch 22, and the four types of men as laid out in the Talmud. Perhaps the Talmud is reflecting upon information derived from 1 Enoch 22. Or maybe it's just a coincidence, but I suspect it's far more than a coincidence. Okay, so then we go on to chapter 23. From thence I went to another place to the west of the ends of the earth, and I saw a burning fire which ran without resting, and paused not from its course day or night, but ran regularly. Maybe this is corresponds somehow with the fire, the river of fire that we already talked about. And I asked, saying, What is this which rests not? Then Reuel, one of the separate angels who was with me, answered me and said to me, This course of fire which you have seen is the fire in the west, which persecutes all the luminaries of heaven. So it also may correspond with Tahti, as we discussed earlier. Then we get to chapter 24. Enoch sees 7 magnificent mountains here. And from thence I went to another place of the earth, and he showed me a mountain range, and the ground in between them was burning of fire, which burnt day and night. And I went beyond it, and I saw 7 magnificent mountains, all differing each with the other, and the stones thereof were magnificent and beautiful. Now, it's important to remember, as we've discussed in this study, we were told several times at the beginning of Enoch's journey, his tour here, that this is a vision. And so what Enoch is actually seeing is corresponding to the symbolic world, if you will, the pattern after which this world was made, like the tabernacle was made after a pattern. And so he's not seeing the earth, the real earth that we live on here. He is seeing a vision, just like Daniel chapter 7, where Daniel saw a vision of a leopard with four heads, for example. It had symbolic meaning. Verse 2, I went beyond it and saw seven magnificent mountains, all differing each from the other, and the stones thereof were magnificent and beautiful. Magnificent is the whole glorious appearance, fair exterior. Three towards the east, one founded on the other, three towards the south, one upon the other. Deep, rough ravines, so no one which joined with the other. So these mountains, these seven mountains, represent the area of Jerusalem, the environs of Jerusalem, the Jerusalem above, as opposed to the Jerusalem below in this earth. And the seventh mountain was in the midst of these, and it excelled them in height, resembling the seat of a throne, and fragrant trees encircled the throne. We're going to deal with these fragrant trees a little bit more in a minute. And among them was a tree such as, well, I guess we're going to get to it. Verse 4, among them was a tree such as I had never yet smelt, neither was any among them, nor was there others like it. It was a fragrance beyond all fragrance, and its leaves and blossoms and wood wither not forever, and its fruit is beautiful, and its fruit resembles the dates of a palm. And I said, how beautiful is this tree, and fragrant its leaves are fair, and its blossoms very delightful in appearance. Let's finish the last verse of this chapter, and then we'll look at our handout. Then answered Michael, one of the set apart and honored angels, who was with me, and was their leader. And we'll go into chapter 25 in a minute, but we have a handout here, the tree of life, in our handouts. And there's a quote here from the Zohar. Now, you may have noticed, and I said it repeatedly in this study, that the book of Enoch is used throughout the Zohar. The Zohar makes references to the book of Enoch itself, as we'll find out in a minute, and of material in the book of Enoch, as we have found throughout this study. Here we are over and over and over. You've noticed in my handouts that obscure material that appears in the book of Enoch is used in the Zohar, often without referencing Enoch. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But the river of fire in the Zohar, right out of the book of Enoch. The fallen angels, the story of Azazel and Shemi-Chazah, or Uzzah and Shemi-Chazah in the book of Enoch. I'm sorry, in the Zohar. Right on track. The sirens and their what sirens are and their relationship to those fallen angels. The Zohar nails exactly what the book of Enoch says about these things. And this is all very interesting because skeptics claim that the Zohar originated in Spain in the 12th century as a sort of forgery. The Zohar claims to have originated in the late 1st or early 2nd century. I'd have to go look up the date of Rabbi Shimon, but right in there, in that time period. And the book of Enoch, as we know it, was unavailable to European Jews in the 13th century. In fact, it was pretty much unavailable from the 4th century, when it became anathema to, in Christianity at least, um, uh, it became unavailable. It was unavailable in Europe. The only place that it survived from the 4th century to modern times in a complete form is in Ethiopic, in Africa, the Ethiopic church, in which it was considered canon. It's still considered canon, but only in this Ethiopic translation that was completely unknown outside of Ethiopia uh, until the late 18th century. Now, in the time since the Ethiopic made its way, explorers made their way from Europe to Ethiopia and brought back copies of the Book of Enoch. Um, the some Greek manuscripts, partial manuscripts, have turned up in a variety of sources in the 20th century, and of course the Dead Sea Scrolls with Aramaic fragments of the Aramaic have turned up in the 20th century. But in in the Middle Ages, in Europe, the Book of Enoch was virtually unknown. There was question as to whether there ever really had been a real Book of Enoch, and its contents were virtually unknown. I say that because our handout, Zohar, Volume 1, 37b, says, tradition further tells us that Enoch also had a book, which came from the same place as the book of the generations of Adam. This is the source of the book known as the Book of Enoch. When God took him, he showed him all supernal mysteries. That just sure sounds like the material that we're reading, isn't it? And the tree of life in the midst of the garden and its leaves and branches, all of which can be found in his book. Happy are those of exalted piety to whom the supernal wisdom has been revealed, and from whom it will not be forgotten forever, as it says, the secret of the Lord is with them that fear him, and is secret to make them know it. Psalms 25:14. That's right on. References the Book of Enoch by name, and then describes accurately the material that we're reading right now in the Book of Enoch. And this is twofold evidence. On the one hand, it's evidence that the Zohar, at least the core of the Zohar, is what it claims to be. That it is material from the late 1st, early 2nd century, certainly prior to the 4th century, and that it's from the material from the Holy Land, not from Europe in the Middle Ages. That's very important, because only crazy people believe that the Zohar is what it claims to be, at its core, at least. The academic skeptical view is that the Zohar was forged by Jews in the Middle Ages in the 1200s. Specifically, Moshe de Leon is the accusee. Okay, so that it's A, evidence of that, and B, then it also tells us that the rabbis whose opinions we're reading in the Zohar are being influenced by and have in their possession in their vast library of materials that they reference in the Zohar, the Book of Enoch, and therefore we have a sneak we have a view into how ancient rabbinical ancient sages of rabbinic Judaism understood the book of Enoch. All right, in the Zohar. All right, let's move on to chapter 25. And he said to me, Enoch, why do you ask me regarding the fragrance of the tree, and why do you wish to learn the truth? Then I answered, saying, I wish to know about everything, but especially about this tree. And he answered, saying, this high mountain which you have seen, whose summit is like the throne of God, is his throne, where the set apart great one, Yahweh of glory, the eternal king, will sit when he shall come down to visit the earth with goodness. This recalls Jeremiah 3:17, which tells us that Jerusalem will be his throne, because this is Mount Zion. Well, it's not the literal Mount Zion. It is the heavenly Mount Zion. Remember, this is a vision. Verse 5, it shall then be given to the righteous and set apart. Its fruit shall be food for the chosen. It shall be transplanted to the set apart place, to the temple of Yahweh, the eternal king. So this is the Holy Mount and the Temple Mount. And it corresponds to the tree of life in the heavenly Holy of Holies, and the Torah that comes forth from it, we read in Isaiah chapter 2, I think verse 4. I'll look that up real quick. Isaiah 2:4. Make sure I got the right reference here. Nope, it's actually Isaiah 2:2. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. And then verse 3, and many people shall go and say, come you, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, the mountain of Yahweh, to the house of the Elohim of Jacob, and he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the Torah, and the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem. And that is the fruit of the tree of life, corresponding to the fruit of the tree of life here in this vision. As for this fragrant tree, no mortal is permitted to touch it. It shall be great till the great judgment. Wind shall take vengeance on all and bring everything to its consummation forever. It shall then be given to the righteous and set apart. Its fruit shall be for food to the chosen. It shall be transplanted to the set apart place, to the temple of Yahweh, the eternal king. Then shall they rejoice with joy and be glad, and onto the set apart place shall they enter, and its fragrance shall be in their bones, and they shall live a long life on the earth, such as the fathers lived. Look at Isaiah 65:20 on that. You'll find an interesting insight. And in their days shall no sorrow or plague or torment or calamity touch them. Then blessed I, the Elohim of glory, the eternal King, who had prepared such things for the righteous, and has created them and promised to give to them. So this is the heavenly Jerusalem and the heavenly tree of life, and the afterlife destination for the righteous is symbolized by this. Okay. Verse 1, and I went from there to the middle of the earth, and I saw a blessed place in which there were trees and branches abiding and blooming, of a dismembered tree, and there I saw a set apart mountain, and coming up from the east there was a stream, and it flowed towards the south. And I saw towards the east another mountain higher than it, between them a deep and narrow ravine. In it also ran a stream underneath the mountain. And the west thereof there was another mountain, lower than the former, and of small elevation, and a ravine deep and dry between them. And another deep and dry ravine was set in the extremities of the three mountains. And all the ravines were deep and ran narrow, being formed of hard rock, and trees were not planted upon them. And I marveled at the mountains, and I marveled at the ravine. Yes, I marveled very much. The mountain is the Temple Mount, Mount Zion. The stream is the Gihon stream in the Kidron Valley, which was the main source of water for the pool of Siloam. It was the stream. We'll look at. We have a handout for this, so let's just go to our handout on 1 Enoch 26:2, the Gihon Spring in the Kidron Valley. And I have a couple of references to this here from the Talmud. The first is from the Babylonian Talmud, Yoma 77b through 77a. Rabbi Pinchas, in the name of Rabbi Huna of Sepharus, said, "The spring that issues from the Holy of Holies in its beginning resembles the antenna of locusts. As it reaches the entrance to the sanctuary, it becomes as the head of the wasp, I think it is. I think I misprint there. Wasp. As it reaches the ulam, the main hall leading to the sanctuary, it becomes as the thread of the woof." Maybe it is the thread of the warp. Okay. As it reaches the entrance of the temple court, it becomes as large as the mouth of a small flask. That is meant by what we learned. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said, "Hence go forth the waters, which will bubble forth from under the threshold of the sanctuary." From there onwards, it becomes bigger, rising higher and higher until it reaches the entrance of the house of David. As soon as it reaches the entrance of the house of David, it becomes even as a swiftly running brook, in which men and women afflicted with gonorrhea, menstruating women, and women after childbirth bathe. As it is said, "In that day there shall be a fountain opened in the house of David, and to the inhabitants of Jerusalem for purification and for sprinkling." That's Zechariah 13:1. Said Rabbi Joseph, "Hence there is an intimation that a menstruating woman at her purification must sit in water that reaches in height up to the neck, but the law is not in accord with him." Okay, and then the other reference is Mishnah Midot 2:6. Through it, the water, talking about the water gate, the waters trickled forth, and in the future will issue out from under the threshold of the house. Okay, so this is some insight from the Talmud on this location that Enoch is seeing in chapter 26. Then we get to chapter 27. Then I said, "What object is this blessed land, which is entirely filled with trees, and this accursed valley between?" Then Uriel, one of the set-apart angels who was with me, answered and said, "This accursed valley is for those who are cursed forever. Here shall all the accursed be gathered together, who utter with them lips against Yahweh unseemly words, and of his glory speak hard things. Here shall they be gathered together, and here shall be their place of judgment." In the last days, well, let me pause there for a moment. Let's talk about this valley. This is Gehinnom, the valley of Gehinnom. I understand today, well, let's back up a little bit. In ancient times, this was a place where Moloch worshippers and Baal worshippers sacrificed and children and burnt children in their offerings their to Moloch. Um, we read about that in 2 Kings 23:10, 2 Chronicles 28:3 and 33:6, Jeremiah 7:31 through 32, Jeremiah 19:2, verse 2 and 6, and Jeremiah 32:35. Um, in the first century, in Yeshua's time, all the refuse, the trash of the city was thrown into this valley, and there was a fire constantly going there, constantly consuming all the trash because the prevailing winds blew the other way. So typically the smell would be outside the city. So it was a cursed place. Today, however, you can go have a picnic in Gehinnom. It's a park. And because of the things that happened there in the past and all this trash that was burned there and thrown in there in ancient times, it's quite fertile. And so that's where Gehinnom comes from. The term Gehenna or Gehinnom actually comes from this accursed valley that is adjacent to Jerusalem, the valley of Gehinnom. And it corresponds to the lake of fire and the ultimate place of judgment for the wicked. Verse 3, in the last days there shall be upon them the spectacle of righteous judgment in the presence of the righteous forever. Here shall the merciful bless Yahweh of glory, the eternal King. In the days of judgment over the former they shall bless him for the mercy in accordance with which he has assigned them their lot. Then I blessed Yahweh of glory and set him his glory and lauded him gloriously. Chapter 28. And thence, let's see, do we have any? I think that's the end of our handouts, right? Yeah. I don't think we have any more handouts. No. Okay. We're going to wrap up because we're nearly to the end of, even though there's several short chapters here, we're nearly to the end of the book of Watchers. And thence I went towards the east and to the midst of the mountain range of the desert, and I saw the Arava, and it was solitary, full of trees and plants. Arava, the Ethiopic has Midbara, which would correspond to the Hebrew Midbar, but the Greek has Erhamon, which the Septuagint usually uses to translate Arava. So could be Arava, it could be Midbar. These are different Hebrew words that mean wilderness. It's almost the proper noun, Arava, for a location south of the Dead Sea Basin, which today forms part of the border between modern Israel and the west of the Jordan to the east. Arava is also commonly translated heaven, as in the KJV, and in the Talmud, Arava is given as the name of the seventh and highest heaven in the Babylonian Talmud, Haggiga 12. And in 2nd Enoch, it's the name of the 10th and highest heaven, 2nd Enoch 20, verse 3 and 22:1. So just to give some insight on this word, Arava, let the reader interpret. Verse 2, the water gushed forth from above, rushing like a copious watercourse, uh, which flowed towards the northwest. It caused clouds and dew to ascend on every side. Chapter 29 has 2 verses. Let's talk about short chapters here. And thence I went to another place in the desert, approached to the east of this mountain range, and there I saw aromatic trees, and exhaling the fragrance of frankincense and myrrh, and the trees were similar to the almond tree. Chapter 30. And beyond these I went afar to the east, and I saw another place, a valley full of water, and therein were sweet-smelling reeds, such as the mastic, and on the sides of those valleys I saw fragrant cinnamon, and beyond these I proceeded to the east. Chapter 31. And I was shown other mountains, and among them I saw trees, and there flowed forth from them nectar, which is named Sarara and Galbanum. And beyond these mountains I saw another mountain to the east of the ends of the earth, whereon were aloe trees, and all the trees were full of sacti, being like the bark of an almond tree. And when one burnt it, there comes forth a fragrant odor. Then when their bark is ground, they are sweeter than any fragrance. Chapter 32. And after these fragrant odors, approximately to the northeast of them, I was shown the mountains. I was shown other mountains full of choice, nard and fragrant trees, and cinnamon and pepper. Thence I went to the east of all these mountains, far towards the east of the earth, and passed over the Red Sea, and went far from it, and passed over the darkness from it. I have a footnote here. This could refer what we call the Red Sea today, or to the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. And I came to the Paradise of Righteousness. I was shown from afar off trees were numerous, more numerous than these trees, and 2 great trees, very great, beautiful, and glorious, and magnificent. The tree of knowledge, whose set-apart fruit was they eat to know great wisdom. That tree is in height like the fir, and its leaves are like those of the carob tree, and its fruit is like the clusters of the vine, very beautiful, and the fragrance of the tree penetrates afar. And then I said, how beautiful is the tree, and how attractive is its look. Then Raphael, the set-apart angel who was with me, answered me and said, this is the tree of wisdom, of which your father of old and your mother of old, who are before you, have eaten. And they learned wisdom, and their eyes were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they were driven out of the garden. That really doesn't take a whole lot of explaining, of course. That's the Genesis chapter 3 and the tree of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. Enoch chapter 33, Enoch visits the ends of the east. And from thence I went to the ends of the earth, and I saw there great beasts, and each differed from the other. And I saw birds also differing in appearance and beautiful, and voices, the one differing from the other. And to the east of those beasts I saw the ends of the earth, and whereon the heaven rests. This is the sort of thing that the flat earthers key in on without recognizing that we have already read that this is a vision, like Daniel saw in Daniel 7, a four-headed leopard. This is not literal. Verse 2, and the gates of the heavens opened, and I saw how the stars of heaven come forth. And I counted the gates out of which they proceed, and wrote down all their outlets, of each individual star by itself, according to their number and their names, and their courses, their positions, their times, their months, as Uriel, the watcher who was with me, showed me. Uriel, by the way, all this corresponds somewhat with the book of the astronomical book, which we'll get to later in the book of Enoch, in which Uriel is also his guide. He showed me all things to me and wrote them down for me. Also, their names he wrote for me according to their correspondence to their set times. Um, Chapter 34. Enoch visits the ends of the north. And from thence I went towards the north of the ends of the earth, and I saw great wonders at the ends of the whole earth. And I saw there the gates open in the heaven. Through each of them proceeded north. I'm sorry. Each of them proceeded north winds. When they blow, there is cold, hail, frost, snow, dew, and rain. And out of one gate they blow for good. But when they blow through the other two gates, it is with violence and affliction on the other, and they on the earth, sorry, and they blow with violence. Chapter 35, one verse. And from thence I went towards the west to the ends of the earth, and I saw there three gates of the heaven open, and as I had seen in the east, and the same number of gates, and the same is their number of outlets. And from thence taken to the south of the earth, and I saw three open gates of the heavens, and from thence there come forth wind, the dew, and the rain. And from thence I went to the east of the ends of the heavens, and I was shown the three eastern gates of heaven, open, and small gates between them. Through each of these small gates pass the stars of heaven, and run their course to the west on the path which is shown them. This is all elaborated on in the astronomical book. And as often I saw, I blessed always Yahweh of glory, and I continued to bless Yahweh of glory, who was wrought great and wondrous wonders to show the greatness of his work to the angels and to spirits and to men, that they might praise his work with all his creation, and that they might see his works and his might and his praise, his great work in his hands, and bless him forever. That's the end of the Book of Watchers. Now, the one thing I do want to back up on that I meant to key in on, see if I can back up and find it here. It is where he saw two trees. Back up a little bit. It's up there. I wish I'd keyed on this when we passed by it. Yeah, chapter 32, verse 3. And I was shown from there afar off trees more numerous than these trees, and two great trees. The two great trees, one of them obviously is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but the other tree is obviously the tree of life. Now, what's really interesting here for the flat earthers is that the book of Enoch describes this tree as being in the far east. He had earlier described it as being in the extreme west, so it appears that one can get to this tree going either direction. All right. As if one travels to the extreme east or the extreme west, either way one can get to the tree of life. Okay. We're going to pick up next week in chapter 37, and we're going to begin the book of parables. It's a very exciting book. It's very messianic. It has a lot of messianic material in it, and it's has a lot to do. The whole book is paralleling the vision in Daniel chapter 7 and the vision that we saw earlier in the book of Enoch in chapter 14, I believe. Let me back up here, see if I got that right. Yeah, in which Enoch sees the figure on the throne and is beckoned to come before a figure known as the Word. and this is the Ancient of Days, parallels the Ancient of Days and vision of Daniel 7. All of the next book we're about to begin deals with overall with the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man figure before him, and tying this in with the concept of the Messiah. And there's some messianic prophecy in it and a lot of good messianic information. Book of Parables may not be the best name for it. I would call it the Book of Messiah or the Book of the Son of Man. It's really good stuff. And so we will begin that book next week in our next study. All right. Shalom, everybody. And I'll see you next week where we'll begin the Book of Parables.